So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on essential skills and older people in partnership with Age UK. My name is Alex Stevenson, and I'm Deputy Director here at Learning and Work Institute. We're really pleased to be holding this online event as part of Lifelong Learning Week. Already this week, we've launched the Adult Participation in Learning Survey 2024. We held a fantastic Mayor of London Adult Learning Awards on Wednesday evening at City Hall, and we've run a whole range of events and webinars, which you can catch up on at festivaloflearning.org.uk. Today, our focus is on essential skills and older people. And we already know that, at least when it comes to the working age population, in the UK, 9 million adults have low literacy and or numeracy skills. And we're expecting an update on that figure from the new OECD survey of adult skills in December. But we also know that good essential skills like literacy, numeracy, and digital skills underpin a range of positive social and economic outcomes throughout life, including in later life and beyond retirement. And so we were delighted to have the opportunity to work with Age UK to take a more in-depth look at older people and essential skills, and look at how essential skills affect them, how they can be supported to maintain essential skills and learn new essential skills throughout life. In today's webinar, we are going to hear from our research manager, Hazel Klenk, who will provide a brief overview of our research findings. And after that, I'll introduce our expert panel to give their reflections on the research. We're also keen to hear from our audience today as well. So if you have questions or comments, please drop those in the question box, and we'll do our best to come back to them at an appropriate time during the programme. Feel free also to get involved on social media. So you can use the hashtag Lifelong Learning Week to do that, and we look forward to joining the conversation there. So I'm going to hand over, first of all, to Hazel to talk us through the findings of this research. So Hazel, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. So as Alex said, the research that I'm going to present today focuses on the experiences of older people. Just want to kind of clarify what we mean by this. So we're talking about people aged 50 and over, and we're talking about people who have low essential skills. So we're focusing on literacy, numeracy, and digital skills. This research was commissioned by Age UK, who join us on the call today, to help fill an evidence gap around older adults' experiences of essential skills. In the context of an aging population, longer working lives, and increasing digitalization in society, it's more important than ever to ensure that older people are not excluded from support with their essential skills. In terms of the project aims, the key aims were to understand the impact of skills gaps on older people's daily lives, to explore people's experiences of improving skills, and to identify what support is needed and from whom to help older people improve their skills and ultimately thrive later in life. Next slide, please. So to achieve these aims, we conducted a rapid review to explore the prevalence and impact of poor essential skills among older adults. We looked at the ELSA survey, which is a survey that examines all aspects of older people's lives, including their literacy and numeracy competencies. We conducted interviews with 20 current and or recent learners, essential skills learners, so people studying up to and including level 2. And we ran 2 focus groups with older adults not currently engaged in essential skills learning. We also wanted to gather provider insights on the topic, so we spoke to a few providers who work with older learners. I just want to caveat here that the qualitative findings that I'm presenting today are only representative of the older people we spoke to, rather than kind of the overall population. Next slide, please. So let's look at what the existing evidence tells us. Next slide, thanks. So as Alex said, we know that around 9 million working age adults in the UK have low literacy or numeracy skills. The analysis we did of the ELSA survey found that an estimated 6 million people, older people, so 50 plus, just over a quarter, have difficulties with maths, and the same number have difficulties with literacy. So this is people age 50 and over, including those adults over beyond state pension age. The evidence also shows how poor essential skills can have negative economic, social, and personal impacts on people's lives. And I'll talk about those impacts a bit later on. Just to focus on the economic impact from the existing evidence, analysis conducted by Pro Bono Economics found that someone who left school at 18 with very poor literacy skills will have earned around £33,000 less by state pension age. So we can see that kind of cost of low essential skills that can have over a lifetime. However, kind of the bottom line is that there's a shortage of information about older adults, particularly people post-retirement age. So that's where this piece kind of comes in as well. Next slide, please. Next few slides focus on our findings from the fieldwork. So the first important point to note is that older people with low essential skills have unique and complex needs. We spoke to people with caring responsibilities, both children and grandchildren, but also parents and other family members, health conditions, varying experiences of employment. So kind of a wide range of needs and experiences and circumstances. But we did identify some kind of shared experiences. These were worsening or new health conditions or new disability, bereavement, undiagnosed learning difficulties or disabilities, leaving school with few or no qualifications, and also having a negative experience at school. These were all shared experiences and quite common. And we'll see in the following slide how these experiences kind of interact with older people's experiences of low essential skills. The people we spoke to told us that they found everyday tasks challenging. They kind of pinpointed individual tasks rather than saying kind of overall, I find maths difficult, or I find reading difficult. It's kind of overall. It was kind of pinpointing specific tasks. So examples were understanding written information in an official letter, or filling out an official form, booking medical appointments, applying for jobs online. These were the common challenges. We also found that different kinds of essential skills needs overlap. So using a computer or a smartphone to fill out a form online, set up an account online, are kind of those examples where literacy and digital skills are overlapping. We also found that people told us about digital skills challenges much more than talking about challenges with literacy and numeracy. And we think this might be due to the relative lack of stigma attached to discussing digital skills challenges. And people talk about this kind of much more openly. None of the participants we spoke to kind of elaborated on this point, so it would be potentially really interesting to hear from other experts in the room today on your reflections on this point. We found that next slide, please. Thank you. We found that low essential skills can negatively impact on people in 4 main areas of their lives, which is kind of highlighted in this slide. So as I've mentioned, filling out forms, booking medical appointments online, really common challenges, which can mean older people feel really locked out of accessing essential services like welfare support and healthcare provision. The second main impact we found was that older people told us that low essential skills has held them back from applying for jobs throughout their lives, as well as progressing in work as well. And they feel particularly locked out of employment opportunities since the move to digital, where job search and job application processes are predominantly online now. Poor essential skills can make managing health quite challenging. So, for example, reading and understanding prescriptions, booking medical appointments, And low essential skills also affected people's well-being. So people told us about feeling lonely and isolated. We also heard that people can feel excluded from digital-based social interactions with family and friends. So kind of texting and that kind of thing can feel left out of that. Low essential skills can negatively impact on older people's confidence and self-esteem, which a lot of people traced back to a negative experience at school. In some cases, we heard that this led them to kind of hiding their skills gaps because of feeling embarrassed and ashamed. So hiding this from employers, from family and friends as well. So the arrows on the side of this slide just kind of illustrate how these impacts can be exacerbated when coupled with other experiences that I mentioned that are common to older people. So accessing essential services can be kind of even more challenging when you're also experiencing bereavement, or your health is worsening, or you have an undiagnosed learning difficulty or disability. And the last one, age, is kind of people told us that these challenges increase or kind of are exacerbated with age as well. Next slide, please. So moving on to kind of what we found out about what helps people engage in learning, older people engage in learning. So older people told us they were really keen to engage in learning and place value on both maintaining their skills in later life, but also developing new ones. And some kind of even told us that it becomes more important with age. Older people have a range of motivations for taking up learning, improving on a specific skill, feeling more confident, improving their skills for improving their employment opportunities, wanting to meet new people, a range of motivations there. And similar to what we know about other learner groups, older people face barriers to learning as well. So most commonly reported were cost, and accessibility is really important for a lot of people. Availability of suitable provision, so at the right time, at the right level. The format is important as well, so formal or non-formal. And also some attitudinal barriers around kind of fear of learning in later life. And then just finally, the older people we spoke to found out about their learning opportunities from a variety of sources, but I think the two main ones were word of mouth and leaflets in their local communities. So shops, libraries, cafes, and the older people we spoke to really value having access to this kind of information in those local community spaces. It's kind of a key way for them to get information. Next slide, please. During their learning experience, the older people we spoke to told us that they really value in-person support, both from tutors as well as kind of wider support staff. They also liked having provision that flexed around their wider needs. So I talked about some people having caring responsibilities, others were in employment, so kind of the provision flexing around that. And also some people told us that they found being able to repeat a course really, really useful. So having that kind of flexibility to maybe repeat some of the content again. They enjoyed learning, or the people we spoke to enjoyed learning most in welcoming and trusted settings, and in a non-formal and relaxed format was really valued by some of the people we spoke to. And then finally, the providers we spoke to suggested that support for learners who have either diagnosed or undiagnosed learning difficulties and disabilities is really important, given the prevalence of these experiences among older people they see. Next slide, please. So moving on to the recommendations. Firstly, for practice, the kind of headline thing, or the headline message here is that everyone has a role to play in supporting older people with essential skills needs. So Job Centre Plus can play a role by supporting people applying for benefits and reading official letters. Employers can support their workforce to develop their essential skills. There's an opportunity to use the flexibilities of the New Skills and Growth Levy to support literacy and numeracy skills development. And then kind of in the context of longer working lives and more people changing careers later in life, older people would benefit from employment support, employment support providers offering targeted support, evidence from an evaluation that Learning and Work conducted recently of employment support for older people shows that kind of peer support and CV writing and online job application support alongside digital skills provision and kind of identifying transferable skills from previous work history can really boost older people's confidence and enable them to look for work and find work in a wider range of sectors. Age UK and other organisations can offer that holistic support, so kind of one-to-one advice and guidance, confidence building, opportunities to socialise, as well as opportunities to develop essential skills. And they can offer this support in really welcoming, trusted and comfortable settings. And then finally, GPs can play a role in supporting people to and other medical professionals to manage their health and well-being through social prescribing to learning. Next slide, please. So the next set of recommendations focuses on what helps people to engage and progress in learning. And a lot of these messages or recommendations chime with what we already know works for other age groups too. So it's about having accessible and clear information, relatable and relevant course names. I think Numbers and Natter was a popular choice among some learners. Warm referrals from known points of contact can often really help people take that first step into learning. Cost, location, and resources were also really important factors. So learners who had engaged in a digital skills course told us that having a laptop provided to them had meant they were able to engage in and complete the course. And without that resource, that wouldn't have been possible for them. So this is really important. Having a comprehensive and supportive initial assessment and induction process so that learners are matched with the course that meets their needs, and flexible learning options to meet older people's individual needs. I've talked about this already. Essential skills embedded in other learning content. So for example, numeracy embedded into a sewing course or a budgeting course. Next slide, please. And then finally, just a few policy recommendations. So we're calling for an inclusive and accessible public services so that older people with low essential skills don't feel locked out, especially given that services are increasingly online, as I've said. The second point is around given that older people can value maintaining their skills, we're recommending that the adult skills funding rules recognise skill maintenance as opposed to just skills development or progression. So skills maintenance as an outcome for older learners. And we recommend that specialist support staff are available to help diagnose learning difficulties and disabilities and support learners throughout their learning journey. And then the final recommendation is about awareness raising. So running an awareness raising campaign to promote learning later in life. And this could be part of national and local skills strategies. And that concludes my short presentation. Thank you very much. And back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Hazel. That was a really excellent overview of the research findings and so much rich detail in there. I love the idea of a course being advertised as Numbers and Natter. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Maybe we'll return to that kind of example of practice in a moment. If you do have questions about the research findings of Hazel's presentation, please do post those and we will try to pick up on those a bit later in the discussion. But for now, I would like to move on to our expert panel, and perhaps if you could all join us on screen while I introduce you, that would be great. So firstly, we are delighted to be joined by Jackie Lawson, who is Ways to Wellbeing Activities Coordinator, and Martin Lewis, who is Wellbeing Coordinator at Age UK in Leeds. It's really great to have you both with us today, and it was a pleasure and an inspiration actually to have the opportunity to visit the Age UK Centre in Leeds earlier this year and hear directly from the older people that you're working with. Also from Age UK, we're really pleased to be joined by Chris Brooks, who is Age UK's Head of Policy. And Chris will be helping us consider the all important policy implications of this piece of work and how that will feed into Age UK's work as the UK's leading charity for older people. To help us think about how adult education providers can support older people, I'm very pleased to welcome Katie Easy, who's Head of Learning Delivery at the Workers' Educational Association. The WEA is the largest voluntary sector provider of adult education in England and Scotland, serving over 40,000 learners. And finally, a very special welcome to Christine Cieslak, who joins us from Brussels. Christine's Head of Programmes and Stakeholder Engagement at the European Association for the Education of Adults. And EAEA is the voice of non-formal adult education in Europe, with over 120 members in 43 countries. And Christine will be bringing a broader perspective from the work that they've been doing around learning for older people across Europe, and will help us to understand where we are in relation to the bigger picture. Welcome everybody, and thank you all for joining us. Jackie and Martin, if I can come to you first of all, please. You're obviously working very closely with older people on a day-to-day basis. And so I'm really keen to get your reflections on the report and what kinds of challenges do you see in your work, and what's working well in terms of the support that you provide and solutions to essential skills for older people. I don't know who wants to go first, but either of you is welcome to jump in.
Shall I go first, Martin? Just set the scene a little bit. Okay. As Alex has rightly introduced us, we work for Age UK, Leeds as wellbeing coordinators. That is an umbrella kind of title for a number of different services that we do offer. I'm going to specifically look at a new service that we're delivering, a 12-week programme called the Wellbeing Workshop. And the reason I picked up on that is because it gives clients and ourselves an opportunity to explore the 5 ways to wellbeing in a bit more depth. So we can be a bit creative about what we do and how we deliver activities. So we introduce things such as brain training. We help, hopefully, to encourage intergenerational work, which we find is a really good way of providing an audience of different ages on both sides, if you like. So there's a lot of exchange of information that goes on. Younger people seem to be born with a mobile phone or a laptop in their hands, and so they're able to direct older people easily, or more easily, in a fun and creative way. So we find that many of our older people who are coming to us because of isolation or because of lack of peer support want to initially come because of social connection. But what they find is that when they gain trust and they become familiar with the setting that they're coming to, that they can have fun, we find that that offers a great platform for learning. And people don't necessarily feel that they're coming to learn, but they are learning, because they don't often equate the learning experience with fun. You've mentioned earlier, that Hazel mentioned earlier, that the past experiences may have included truancy, poor education experience, nobody understanding different learning styles, that kind of thing. So for people who can engage now because they're coming through something they enjoy, like crafting or quizzing, all kinds of a plethora of activity that they can engage in, it's really important for older people. It's also, I think, important to recognise that our older people are living longer now. And so for many people, there could be another 30 or 40 years after retirement for some people who have been working all their lives, maybe up until 67 or something, and then retired, may have another 30 or 40 years to look forward to. So it's about having that sense of purpose as well. and also empowering a person to believe that their experience that they've gained over the years has not been wasted. It can be utilised. So we also encourage those people to share those skills with their peers. So if they've learned something about, I don't know, it could be knitting or it could be about train spotting, whatever it is, we encourage them to share that as well. So again, that provides a platform for people to believe, well, actually, this is quite fun and nobody's going to laugh at us and nobody's going to patronize us, and we didn't have to go anywhere. We didn't have to go to an institution in its own right that we consider to be a school or a college. We've actually learned something here. So I guess what we have learned at Age UK is the benefit of having educators come to us as well in different forms, so that we've already got a captive audience, if you like, and but people have had their confidence improved. So a lot of the groundwork has already been done. I'm going to pass you over to Martin, who focuses more on digital.
Thanks, Jackie. That's really, really helpful. Yeah, and I think there is something about the idea of the places and spaces where people are able to access learning that we might come back to. But yeah, Martin, can you tell us a bit about your work on the digital side of things?
Thanks, Alex. So I've got about 5 years experience on the front lines of trying to engage older people with technology and digital inclusion. And if I was a teenager, I'd have a GCSE in it by now, I reckon. So I would say from my experience, the report is very much reflects what I've seen. It's very much, it picks out a lot of the things that I've seen and the general sort of experience for older people. But one of the things I would mention is that generally the people that I see are people who've self-referred. They're the people who've chosen, who've identified they need help and they've come and sorted it out in general, about 80% of the people. So I see people that already want to learn and they're, rife with challenges, some of which they understand and some of which they don't. One of the other things that I'd pull up is money and privilege. It's people I see in general, people who can afford to buy devices, because the ones that can't even afford them. So they're much harder to reach because they still need to be included to a large extent, but they're less likely to self-identify as somebody who could even be involved. And obviously low self-esteem and low financial resources go together. So they're, even if we can find them, they're much more difficult to get involved. One of the other things maybe not in the report is the physical challenge of using a smart touchscreen device, particularly for people who've got some of the physical difficulties associated with age. Some people's fingers just don't seem to work on the touchscreens the way that other people's fingers work. And then they may have tremors or other issues around arthritis or something. So yeah, those are things that I'd add in, but the general findings in the report very much reflect my experience. Just say one other thing is once that Jackie's also mentioned is the negative experience at school. People with learning or behavioural differences due to neurodiversity, including dyslexia and ADHD, were literally absolutely punished when they were at school. So they very much learned to mask that and gone through their whole lives not asking for help. So I do see probably a representative number of the people that I see are from that spectrum. And they are aware of their challenges, but they've never been diagnosed. So they're definitely in that category that's identified in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. That's really helpful, in encouraging us to think about accessibility, both in terms of the skills, but also in terms of the physical requirements, and also, very much worth noting that educational context 40 or 50 years ago is very, very different to what people might experience now. So thank you for those points. And Chris, I'm going to come to you next. What are your kind of takeaways from the report in terms of how you see the policy agenda for older people at the moment, and what will you be taking from the research to kind of feed into some of your messages around supporting older people?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And firstly, thanks to you and to Hazel for doing this work for us. I think it's a really, really good report, actually, which has, as we've already heard, has a lot of information to unpack from it. I just start by sort of cycling back to the beginning and why we commissioned the research. So I think we know quite a lot about low digital skills, which could be linked to the point that Hazel raised about people being less reticent, voicing their fears about using tech. But we knew a lot less about literacy and numeracy. And across Age UK, we're a network of local charities like Age UK Leeds, who are all independent, and we're the sort of central body where I work. And we're working at a national level. But I think across both the national and local levels, we heard from lots of people who really struggle to digest information from official sources, like the DWP or their GP. And we wanted to understand more about why this is. We suspected that poor essential skills were a factor, but as Hazel also said, we knew very little about this. It's just an under-researched topic. But there's also a lot of crossover between the three areas: literacy, numeracy, and digital. And it feels really important that with the increased need for people to manage their money online and take financial decisions, so the pension reforms will mean that people need to keep actively managing their money until a much older age than was the case 10 years ago. And the demise of bank branches as well means a lot more people are relying on online ways of managing their money. And across literacy may be linked more to the complexities of filling out forms to apply for benefits. So that crossover there feels like this is a really important area which is of growing relevance across lots of different areas of policy. And I think it's clear that having poor essential skills can have a significant impact across all the issues that I mentioned, that Hazel mentioned earlier. And ultimately, it's often people on lower incomes. And that means that there's a knock-on impact where people will fail to do very important things like claiming pension credit, often because it's a really complicated form and people struggle with it anyway. And if you have poor literacy skills, it just makes it really, really difficult. And it's probably part of the reason why take up for pension credit is so low. It's around 2/3 of eligible people claim it. So there are a significant number of older people missing out on the support that they could access, possibly as a result or partly as a result of having low essential skills. So I think the report is really helpful in helping us understand more about why that is. There are two sides of the coin from our point of view, I think. One side is linked to improving people's literacy and numeracy and digital skills. And that's where we do a lot of work. And the other side is addressing the barriers that people face as a result. So I think in terms of our national level work, we do both, particularly with digital skills, where we have a big digital inclusion program, which many local Age UKs are involved in as well. That's one of the main activities that Age UK does across the network. And we reach a large number of people each year and help them improve their skills. And then on the latter, we do a lot of work helping people apply for benefits as well. And that, again, that's nationally and locally. But it's an issue right across the country in every pocket of every community, I think, where there are people who are just failing to get the support that they need. So the research really helps us here, and hopefully it's useful for local Age UKs too. And I hope it raises the profile of investing in older people's skills to policymakers, which very often within the skills and agenda is very much a Cinderella issue. It doesn't really get thought about by policymakers, largely because I think for many years policy here has been very workforce focused. So it's been very much rooted in helping people get into work, stay in work. But nowadays, there are increasing numbers of people in the pre-state pension age, sort of 50 to 66 age group, who are really struggling to work. And also many people over state pension age who are continuing to work. So even if you just think about it from a really narrow workforce point of view, it's become an increasingly important issue. And that doesn't even touch on any of the wider benefits to society and any of the issues affecting pensioners. So we really welcome the research, and I think its findings and recommendations are really interesting, both for policy and practice. As I said, there's a lot to go on. So hopefully over the next weeks and months, we can unpack it in more detail. And I think in the short term, it will really help us because, as you've probably seen, we're campaigning hard on the changes that the government announced to the winter fuel payment. It's become increasingly important that people can apply for pension credit. So that seems the really obvious link for us in the short term is to use the report to as another angle to push that, encourage people to claim pension credit, and encourage government and local authorities to provide the support that people need. With so many people failing to claim and missing out on a significant amount of money, I think it's a really sad state of affairs. And this again, but it just bolsters the case for that. And I think we'll see that across all the different issues that Hazel mentioned, where there are specific points that we can go after that are maybe quite niche bits of policy sometimes. But it's really helpful for building the case across all of these. And I think over time, all of these will come out in the wash. So thanks. I'll hand back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, and I think there's those implications of kind of, longer and different working lives are really important in how we think about what the learning offer is to older adults for a range of those purposes. And thank you for your comments on the work. I hope it's going to be useful in your work as well. There were quite a lot of implications there, I think, for providers of essential skills and whether they're local authority, adult education services, FE colleges. Katie, if I can come to you next. I imagine that with so many learners on your books, some of them must be older people, and it would be great to hear a bit more about the ways in which you think that provision can be designed to be more accessible and inclusive to older learners, and maybe if you have some examples from your own work of that as well.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. It's a really interesting event and really useful to listen to how much commonality there is between different speakers speaking. That reinforces the findings and the research, and we found the same thing, that the research reinforces much of what we see and much of what we know for our own practice. The Learning and Work Institute participation survey says that older people are less likely to be in learning, but in community settings, older people tend to be in the majority. So for us in 23-24, 53% of our learners are age 50 plus. So yes, we've got lots of experience in working with that older adult learning demographic, and it's really important to the work that we do. And nearly the same amount, again, we're from disadvantaged postcodes. So we're working with some of the harder to reach learners across the country. And that's key to kind of our mission and vision as an organisation. And I think that what it reflects is that the approaches and the topics that are offered by community providers such as ourselves are attractive to learners from that learner demographic. They're welcoming the social side of learning and the health and well-being benefits from that education, and they're building the confidence to return. And they might not be learning for work skills, but with the right support, some of them will progress to that. And for lots of learners, that's not their motivation in the first instance. And often they're further from, depending on the age of the learner. And I think that's really key. This is a very, very big spread of age, and we need to be aware of the nuances within that. I think it's a stretch to suggest that things like JCP is the most ideal and welcoming place for older learners in some instances. And I think that lines up as an area of compulsion to be engaged with that provider, but sometimes that's a barrier rather than a benefit, and I think that's really difficult. And I think there's a lot of economically inactive older people who aren't necessarily ready or able to return to the workforce unless they're forced back by their economic situation. And their motivations and their circumstances, I think, need to be better understood in the policy world to really start to align that policy to practice, because I think that there's a real challenge there. And that level of support that those learners need is not just about workplace skills. It's likely to be about whole confidence building an essential skills package. And the more that can be community-based, the better. Face to face, building that social capital, building that confidence in the first instance. And then it's the next step. For lots of learners, small steps and steps that sometimes take a little bit of time. It's not going to be an immediate shift for those learners. So I think, like you'd highlighted in the report, the barriers are very much the same thing we find, and that shame and that stigma and that poor previous educational experience is at the heart. And our colleagues already said that. I think it's really important. They've been told that they're stupid, they don't believe that they're capable, and getting learners to a place where they can start to see that they can do things and that there are opportunities available to them, and then support and infrastructure that can wrap around them is sometimes the most enlightening light bulb moment for some learners, and it's fabulous and it's really important. But I think you talked about examples. I can remember teaching an adult learner who was forced by circumstances. She was part of the travelling community. Her husband had died. She had many children. She had lots of grandchildren. None of them knew she couldn't read because she'd masked it for years and years and years, and her husband had always done it for her. And only when he died was she vulnerable, because suddenly she had to do things she'd never had to do before. And she took this massive step and she went into adult education and she learned how to read. And it was transformative, and it was transformative in her community, because it wasn't a community where that kind of access of education was common and familiar, and it broke down massive barriers within that community and worked with a wide range of learners as a consequence. But had her husband not died, I genuinely don't know that she would have walked through that door. And that's that thing about circumstance forcing the hand sometimes in that instance. I think one of the other challenges is that social isolation piece, and you highlight in the report the importance of family and friends in providing support and guidance, but we know that there's nearly 4 million people living in chronic loneliness in the UK from ONS data. So we've got that challenge in how to reach some of those people for whom word of mouth isn't an avenue. And I think that the mix of media and marketing techniques to reach that kind of learner is really, really key within there. And I think that cost, but all those barriers that are common, that accessibility, that availability, but sometimes the big, shiny, super impressive buildings are really scary for adult learners returning to learning. And actually what they want is their local library or their local social club, or they want somewhere that they know and they feel safe. And if they can learn in that environment, then the next step somewhere else can sometimes be less terrifying. And therefore, that community investment is really, really critical. And I think supports that whole wider infrastructure of interagency working. So I think they're really, really key. And we know from our research, we produce an annual impact report, and our learners say things like 83% reported improved wellbeing, 91% made fewer visits to the GP than the national average. So it has a knock-on implication for health benefits. So I think when we're considering policy, the wider benefit of that investment and the importance of investment in education is really, really critical. But we don't always see that. So we've seen in the recent budget, we've got 300 million additional funding for younger people in colleges up to the age of 24. And that's fantastic for them. But there's no additional funding for adult ed. There's no additional funding to reach this kind of learner demographic. And I think that that's quite short-sighted when we talk about the increasing age range of the working population and the need for upskilling, reskilling, and in some instances, just skills meeting. So I think that there's that focus. Combined authorities are also reinforcing that message in their contractual requirements. So what we can see, to a greater and lesser degree, depending on combined authorities, in fairness to some of them, is a reinforcement of that skills agenda and a reinforcement of a skills message that's focused on employability into work and within work progression, rather than the steps that get you to there in the first place, if that's the right thing for you, or the steps at the other end of that journey when you might want to give something back to your community, for example, or you might want to learn for your own mental health and well-being, or you just might want to learn. God forbid, that might be a thing that people want to do. I think that the digital poverty piece continues to be an enormous barrier to learning, and one that we're all working to address. And it's that tailoring. Over 50 is not the same as the 60, 70-year-old learner demographic. They're two very, very different learner demographics. And we need to be mindful that other things like ethnicity and gender social background and other people have already mentioned, they have a massive bearing on what people do and don't do, where they will and won't learn, how they will and won't learn, and with whom. So we have to really build that in to some of that provision. So yeah, tailored learning support for us is key, so that community approaches can bring excluded learners back into the fold. National adult learning strategy would be phenomenal within that. A focus on essential skills, and then that focus on where economic activity is being addressed, that community education is seen as a stepping stone to gain confidence and can move people sometimes more quickly towards where they need to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie. And yeah, I really like the point that you're making there about needing to take a more nuanced approach to different kinds of older people and different sort of ages and stages. And also, I think you highlighted something really important, which is the role of combined authorities. And now that most adult education and skills provision is commissioned at that city region level, we know that some of those regions have a big focus on ageing well. For example, Greater Manchester, where I am at the moment. But are they joining up that focus on ageing well with the powers that they also have to commission adult education provision that might also support some of those communities to age well? So really important points there, Katie. Thank you for those. So I'm now going to come to Christine, but before I do so, just a quick reminder, we do have a couple of questions coming in, but please feel free to use the Q&A function to submit your questions for us. But Christine, thank you so much for joining us from Brussels. I'm really interested to see whether what we've been talking about in this session, does it sound familiar from what you see in other European countries? Is there any points of difference? And, you know, what are you learning about what works well for engaging older people in learning from the projects that you're involved in across Europe?
Yeah. Hello, everybody, also from my side. Thanks for having me. I can wholeheartedly agree with everything I've heard so far. I'm actually quite happy and pleased that everybody who came before me already mentioned some core elements of the elderly. I, as a gerontologist myself, I always have the need to state a couple of things before I come to the actual point. So I'm very grateful that you have already summarized basically what we have already talked about 15, 20 years ago, is that age is female. Age is poor and age is lonely. So if we look at the statistics, that's exactly what we have seen in the study also. And there's something also that Katie already mentioned, so thank you for that. I don't have to do that, is that adult learners are one of the most different learning group, because they're so broad and they show the broadest variety of needs and skills. And so thank you for already mentioning that. To put it a little bit, as you said, in the bigger picture, and to look at the maybe transnational level, what we have seen, I agree with that, is that the awareness of the importance of educating and lifelong learning, ALE, adult learning and education, and life-wide learning has increased over the last 2 decades. However, that increase of awareness doesn't always come with the necessary initiatives or strategies. So yes, there has been a constant increase in funding. If we look at the last 20, 30 years of Erasmus Plus and what it was called before, there is the branch for adult learning and education is growing bigger and bigger. I mean, we're talking billions and billions. Yet what we have seen on a European level is that the responsibility to take up learning seem to be shifting towards an individual level. So when it comes to communication, when it comes to initiatives, when it comes to indirect influencing on how adults' education and learning is being implemented on a European level, things are being pushed on to the individual. And if we look at not just this study, but I was going through it, and great job, well done. I agree with everything you found and that I could read up in your study. That is a problem, because people are not in the position to take up that responsibility and foster their own learning lifelong, life-wide, because, as you've mentioned before, there is educational traumata, there is traditionalization of education behavior within the families that's been inherited over the generations. So there is a couple of things that we have to separate when we talk about adult learning and education, especially of the elderly. And a lot of things that you have mentioned are actually the outcome of something and not the actual issue. I'm thinking about digital inclusion. We're talking a lot about twin transition, right? So there's a lot of digitization as well. And if we look at everything that has happened with COVID, we just saw that the digital gap got even wider, right? So even with everything moving more online, one would think, oh, that's a great opportunity. But as Jackie and Martin have mentioned already, there's other things that we have to consider. We cannot just say, oh, it's online now. No, everybody can access this. Oh, no, it's the contrary, right? So the gap is widening. And that is a problem. So that is a challenge that we are facing. And there is something that has to happen in our minds, that we understand that we have to differentiate between formal and structural problems and social and psychological challenges. So that oftentimes formal and structural issues are influencing what then happens on a psychological level, if that makes sense. So I was thinking about ageism. We were implementing a project on ageism. So what we did within many different European partners is that we looked at ageism, how it is spread within certain European countries, and what areas of life it affects. And spoiler alert, obviously it affects nearly all the areas of life. And we were looking especially in ageism at the workplace, and we would explain what it is, because people are not aware that these things exist. I want to say people who are implementing ageism, but also older people who have internalized stereotypes and ageism, and Katie has mentioned it, that they then themselves cope with it in the not most productive way, right? You hiding your deficits instead of tackling them on, because that can be something that is caused by, amongst others, ageism. So we were looking into that, but from that also opportunities are coming up, right? And we will also, you in your study and in general, we are looking at how can we cope with things. And what I found what I was appreciating a lot is that the study was talking about culture on prescription, or you can call it learning on prescription or socializing on prescription, whatever, something on prescription. So for everybody who's not aware on what that is a model where the government, local or European or the community would fund certain initiatives. And we have seen throughout all the years and throughout all the studies that it has so many positive benefits on the individual as well as the community, if you gather, and we have heard that before from the other speakers, that the elderly feel most comfortable in low threshold environments. And if you be able to fund that, that is an excellent approach where is already enough experience available, especially from Ireland. They have very well established system where we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? We can learn from each other. So that is something that you can definitely have a look at and foster, because it is a well-established approach that has proven itself over and over again. but that needs to have certain structural conditions to be able to be implemented. And that's what I said. If these things are not given, then on the individual level, you have to, you can tackle the consequences as much as you want, but it might not be as effective as if you would start on another level. So that's it from the European level.
Thank you, Christine. I think that was a really important points you made there around, you know, it can't solely be the sort of individual's responsibility, and it needs to be more of a sort of shared effort, I think. And also that you raised the issue of ageism in the workplace, and I think there is a role that we haven't talked about here today, and we probably don't have time to do so now, but about how employers can support older workers with their essential skills, and then also thinking about preparation for retirement. And in fact, somebody has made that comment in the chat about what happened to preparation for retirement, and how whether that would support people to reflect on their lives and identify any support that they might need for the next phase of their life. We have a question about, you know, what can colleges do to reach older learners, and I think, you know, we've had some good examples in terms of the locations and the types of learning that older people find helpful and accessible, but there will be more on that in our report. One question that we did also have was about combating the stigma around low literacy and numeracy skills, and I wondered if one of our panel would like to come back very briefly, because we are almost at time, but with any thoughts on combating the stigma around low essential skills. So Christine, you've jumped in there, so I'll give you the chance to come in on that, but very briefly, if you could, please.
I will try my best, because it's one of the topics I could go on forever, but I won't. This is something that I try to briefly scratch the surface on. It's that we have to not only jump into action, but we also have to question how we think of things, how we approach things. And ageism and stigmatization comes from a point where we think a certain way about education. And the way we think about education right now is it's some sort of a tool, right? We can fix things with education. And if we try to move away from that a little bit and see education as what it is, a fundamental right to the person, then we might be able to reduce the stigma around it. We cannot walk around and say upskilling, reskilling, employability, and you have to do that because you are missing or you are lacking a certain skill, but rather approach it in a terms of I don't want to say enlightenment, that's a big word, but in a say that people can use education to further themselves. Then we might be able to say, oh, okay, this is just something I haven't learned yet, and nothing that I am lacking, and this is my shortcoming and I should hide it. But this, again, it's like a global thing, and it's not so easy to transfer to the individual person, because I think the starting point should be somewhere else.
Thank you, Christine. I think that's a really good note to finish on. We need to be taking a much broader view of the learning that's available for adults, and, you know, hopefully that's something that might get picked up as part of the new government's post-16 learning strategy, but we will see. So thank you everybody on the panel for sharing your insights. Thank you for the comments and questions from our audience today. The report that's associated with this project will be published imminently, and we'll be following up after this event in your email inboxes with some further information around that. So do look out for details of the report. And we look forward to keeping a focus on older people and essential skills as the government's agenda for lifelong learning, health and work develops over the coming months and years. If you'd like to continue the conversation about essential skills in particular, we are back on Tuesday, the 19th of November for our annual conference on English, Maths and ESOL. This event is also online and completely free to attend. You can use the QR code that you should have on your screens now for further information and to sign up. And you can also find details on the Learning and Work Institute website. But for now, I can't think of a better way to conclude this year's Lifelong Learning Week So thanks again to all our speakers and panelists, and in particular Age UK for supporting this work. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.